Okay, I know we went through a lot yesterday in class, so I'm going to try and distill it the best I can. What you see on your screen is probably the most important thing that we talked about yesterday, which is this pair of rules involving resolution tendencies. The first thing you need to commit to memory is that scale degree 7 goes up. So scale degree 7 resolves up to do. So T up to do when you're resolving these chords. On the flip side, the sevenths of a chord resolve down more often than not by step. So 7, scale degree 7 resolves up by step, sevenths of a chord resolve down by step. Those two things you really need to keep organized in your brain, especially when we're resolving 5/7s. So with that in mind, then let's jump up here and we are going to just spell and resolve a 5/7 to start. So looking at what we have here, I've got you a key and 2 Roman numerals, 5/7 and 1. So to start, I'm going to go ahead and down here write out just the first 5 notes of the G major scale, just so we can find who scale degree 5 is. So G, A, B, C, D, D is scale degree 5, G is scale degree 1. So that tells us then that our 5/7 is going to be built off of the pitch D. So over in the left here, I'm just going to stack my 5/7. So remember, it's a 7th chord, so you're going to have your triad, and then you're adding an extra third on top to create the 7th. So we have D, F sharp, A, and C for our 5/7. I'm going to write my letter names under here, just so I can keep track when we're spelling. And then our 1 chord is going to be built off of scale degree 1, which is G. So over on the right here, I'm going to stack my triad. So it shows that the 3 pitches I'm going to need are G, B, and D. So from here, now we're in good shape to start to build our chord. Now, again, the Roman numeral is going to tell us what our bass voice is doing. Since both chords, the 5/7 and the 1, are both in root position, that tells us that our bass is just going to move from root to root. So I'm going to go ahead and in my bass voice, I'm going to put my D and also my G. Now, when we're spelling triads, we talked last video about doubling rules. So when you're spelling a triad, you want to double the root. If you can't, you double the 5th. When you're spelling 7th chords in 4-voice texture, 4 notes, 4 voices. So every voice is just going to get one of the pitches. So I can just cross this D off. We're done with it. Now down here, I'm going to just check off my G, because since it is the root, we are going to want to double it at some point. Now let's go ahead and build the rest of our voices here. And again, you are free to do whatever you want in terms of spacing and things like that, or in terms of voicing. I am going to put, let's put the 7th here. And then I will put the 3rd here and the 5th here. So just to double check, I've got a C, I've got an F sharp, I've got an A, I've got one of everybody. So this is spelled correctly. If I double check my spacing, my neighboring voices are all within an octave of one another, but not crossing one another. So we're all good. Now, let's think back to these resolution rules. One of the cool things about the 5/7 is it contains both of these rules in it. So there's a scale degree 7 and there's also a chordal 7th. So 2 of the pitches in your 5/7 are determined, 2 of their resolutions are determined by those rules. So let's think. We're in G major, so G is do. Find T in your brain. You can spell all the way up the scale, or probably easier is to spell down from the root, down from do by a half step, right? So if G is do, F sharp is T. So I'm going to go ahead and so that I don't lose it, I'm going to find that F sharp. I'm going to circle it, and I am going to draw myself an arrow in the direction of its resolution. So scale degree 7 resolves up by step. T resolves up to do. So I'm going to write in that alto voice, T resolves up to do. Now, the other resolution rule is the chordal 7th resolves down by step. Now, we did this little bit of scratch work over here, which is really helpful because it makes it very obvious who the chordal 7th is. So C, or if you're thinking solfege fa, is your chordal 7th, and it has to resolve down by step. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to circle it to remind myself, I'm going to draw an arrow in the direction of its resolution. The chordal 7th resolves down by step, and that gives us a B. So if I'm keeping track now of my tonic triad, 3 of the 4 voices were predetermined for us. The Roman numeral told us what to do with the bass, and those resolution rules told us what to do with 2 other chord members. And what we've got right now, we've got 2 Gs and 1 B. Now, let's look at that last remaining voice, and let's also talk a little bit about what we talked about last video in terms of doubling. Now, if you remember when we resolved just a regular 5 to 1, we had a full triad for our tonic triad with 2 roots, a third, and a fifth. Now let's look at what we have right now. We have 2 roots and a third. With just a 5, no 7th, we were resolving this re last video up to me. But let's think about that. If we resolve re up to me, what's that going to do? That's going to give us another third. And if you think about our doubling rules, we said double the root every time that you can. If you have to, double the fifth. Really, really try and avoid doubling the third. So what has happened here is that we've walked ourselves into a little bit of a corner, because if you resolve re up to me, now we're going to have 2 roots and 2 thirds. Our alternative, there are 2 ways to work out, to get yourself out of this bind. And the first one is to create what we called in class an incomplete triad. And an incomplete triad is just that. It is a triad that is missing a member. Now think about the purpose of the chord members of a triad. The root, obviously you can't get rid of. The root tells you who the chord is. The third tells you triad quality. So if you think about your major triad, let's say major 1 chord, do, mi, so, and your minor 1 chord, do, me, so. So that third is the one that tells you triad quality. You can't get rid of it. The fifth, however, is just less important. So it is not entirely necessary. We like to have it when we can, but if you've got to throw someone off the island, it's going to be the fifth. So because of that, we can actually take the re and the soprano and we can resolve it down to do. And what that leaves us with is an incomplete triad that has 3 roots and 1 third. Now, if I were to play this for you, it would not sound funny, I promise. It sounds totally fine. It doesn't sound empty. So this is a totally acceptable way of resolving a 5-7, and we would refer to that as resolving with an incomplete triad. And on your homework, I ask you to do 1 resolution with an incomplete triad and 1 with a complete one. So if we look at what we got, 5-7, 2 tendency tones, T goes up to do, chordal 7th goes down, and then we resolved re down to do to avoid doubling the third of your 1 chord. Now, what if you decide that you really want a full triad for your tonic triad? You really want all three members there. There is a way to do that. What you sacrifice is the really nice stepwise motion of your upper voices. So thus far, our upper voices have only moved by step or stayed on the same note. If we sacrifice that smoothness, we do find a way to give ourselves a complete tonic triad. So let's go down here. I'm going to go down and I'm going to write us out another staff, and we're going to spell and resolve another 5/7. Okay, so we switched to a minor key. First step, let's figure out who we need in our 5/7, who is going to be the root of our 5/7. So I'm going to go ahead and just spell up the C minor scale. C, D, E flat, F, G. So C is scale degree 1 and G is scale degree 5. So we know our 5/7 is going to be based off of the pitch G. So over here on the left, I'm going to just write in my 5/7. Now I'm going to also reference back something that I wrote in like red on the last video, which is when you're building 5 chords in the minor keys, you have to remember, this is one of those other things that you have to commit to memory. You have to remember to raise your leading tone in a minor key. So think about C minor, your leading tone, scale degree 7 is just below it. So you've got to take your B flat and turn it into a B natural every time. Every time you spell a 5 chord or a 5/7 in a minor key, you're going to need an accidental in there. And that is to raise scale degree 7 to change the quality of that 5 chord from minor to major. So now we have our 5/7. And then our 1 chord is going to be built off of scale degree 1. So over here, I'm just going to sketch this one. I'm going to put my letter names down below my Roman numerals. So we've got G, B natural, D and F, and then C, E flat, and G. So let's get to building. Our Roman numeral tells us what our bass voice is going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and 5/1 in my bass. And then I'm going to cross off that G because we're done with it, and check the C because we are going to want to double it later. Now, the whole point of this one is to build a complete tonic triad. So we're going to be really striving to have 2 roots, a third, and a fifth in our 1 chord at the end. So I'm going to put in just the rest of our voices here. So let's do, let's voice it this way. And don't forget, you did all that work raising your leading tone in your practice spaces. Don't forget to raise it when you put it on the actual staff. So just to double check then, I've got a B natural in the tenor. I've got an F in the alto. I've got my D in the soprano. Whole chord is spelled, so I'm good to go. Next step, tendency tones. Scale degree 7 resolves up. This one's really easy to find now because scale degree 7 is that leading tone that you raised. So scale degree 7 resolves up. So you're going to circle it, draw an arrow in the direction of its resolution. T resolves to do. And then your chordal 7th resolves down. So let's look at our workspace. We spelled it already. The chordal 7th is F. That's going to resolve down. So we find it. It's in our alto voice. F resolves down. So we're going to circle it, draw an arrow. Resolves down by step. Fa down to May. So now we have 2 roots and a third. This is the same spot we were at in the last one. But now we are going to be making it a point to build that complete triad. So we want a G in our remaining voice, and our remaining voice is the soprano. So if we leap up to the G, if we decide to go up this way, A couple things are going to happen that are not advisable, but the biggest one is that if you're up here, we've just violated that octave spacing rule, right? Because then your alto and soprano are more than an octave apart. So I got to keep it a little closer. Our other option is to leap the soprano down. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to leap the soprano down, which gives us a G and gives us our nice complete triad. Now, did we sacrifice smooth voice leading? Yes, we did. One of these is not a better option than the other. It's really just an absolute preference. It sort of depends on what you're more willing to sacrifice. Are you willing to sacrifice the full triad, in which case you go this way? Or are you willing to sacrifice that really smooth voice leading, all voices moving by step, in order to get a full triad? So it's totally up to you. I ask you to resolve both ways on the homework just for practice. Now, last thing I'm going to talk about, we mentioned this in class, and this is a full disclosure. The reason that teaching part writing is such a pain in the butt is that there's so many rules. And a lot of these rules are built off of the style from which part writing derived, which is a long ago style. So both of these rules that I have written here, there are more, believe it or not, but they're all kind of related. The thing you need to remember with part writing is your perfect fifth and your perfect octave always have the potential to mess you up. So you really need to find them in your part writing and make sure that you're not breaking any rules with them. The first rule I'm going to talk about is this idea of hidden or direct octaves. And that is when you land on an octave between two voices, coming from either a perfect fifth or an octave, and both voices are moving in the same direction. I drew you this like really bad diagram that's not even on staff paper over here, but this is in essence what a direct octave is. You've got two voices that start on a fifth and you land on an octave with both voices moving in the same direction. So we don't have any instances of that up here because I made sure we didn't, but it is very, very possible to have had one. So if I were to, I'm going to isolate a couple of the voices from this top example and kind of respell them. So let's say that I decided to have my bass voice go here from D to this G, and my soprano going from A to G. Now let's look at the intervals that we have between these voices. Our bass and our soprano, D to A, yes, it's octave displaced, but if you distill it down, D to A is a perfect fifth. Those two voices move to octave Gs, right? G to G is an octave. That in and of itself is not problematic. It's the fact that both voices are moving down to get there that is the issue. So direct octaves deal with these two voices. So you're only isolating two voices. They're moving from a perfect fifth to a perfect octave, and they're moving there in the same direction. That's the problem. If you look at what we had in the blue over here, the soprano and bass are still on the same pitches, but I made the decision way back when I wrote the bass line to move my bass up. So my soprano and bass are still moving from a fifth to an octave, but they're moving in opposite directions. And that's what changes the game for this. Now, similarly, we didn't even get to this in class. We ran out of time, but I'll talk about it here really quickly. Parallel fifths are when you have two voices. Again, we're just talking about isolating two voices. When they move from one perfect fifth to another perfect fifth in the same direction. So you notice that both of these rules deal with directionality. If you might remember on Monday, or even I might have said this on the videos, I always, with these cadences, with these authentic cadences, I always write my bass going up 5-1. I do that for a reason. I do that because it means I never have a problem with these direct octaves. or with any parallel fifths that you might run into. In this instance of building this complete triad here that we did at the bottom, you can also run into parallel fifths against your leaping voice. So both your bass and in our example here, the soprano are leaping. They start out a fifth apart. They end up a fifth apart, both perfect fifths. So if you know that your leaping voice is going to leap down, you've got to move your bass in the opposite direction or vice versa. We will go over that more on Friday since we caught it at the end of class on Wednesday. So don't worry too much about that. Trust me for your homework. Move your bass up 5 to 1 for all of them and you will be absolutely fine. Okay, my Apple Pencil just died. So that's my sign that I'm going to finish up and I will see you guys in class tomorrow.